Here is every single character in Marvel Rivals explained in about 30 seconds. Subscribe if you're new and let's get started. So moving down the list, our first character is Adam Warlock. His primary or left click ability is that he sends out a single bolt dealing damage. His right click or secondary ability is essentially like a machine gun of bolts. He can tether to nearby teammates, making them soulbound and passively healing them. He can heal any friendly hero or himself and have the heal bounce to any nearby friendlies. This is extremely useful when you're all clumped up together. If Adam Warlock dies, you turn into a ghost and you fly around like a spooky little boy and you can revive yourself. Pretty useful. Adam Warlock's ultimate is essentially OG Mercy from Overwatch 1, where he can revive all of his fallen teammates. Thought you won a team fight? No, I don't think so. For Black Panther, his primary attack is essentially like a close range melee, where you use the claws of Black Panther tearing people up. His alternate fire is you launch a massive javelin at an enemy. If the enemy is hit by the javelin, they receive a mark. If enemies are hit by this said mark, you can use Black Panther's shift ability to dash at the marked target, and if you hit them, you automatically get to cooldown for the dash, so you can dash through that enemy 2 times. Pretty useful, huh? Black Panther's ultimate ability is you launch the Big Cat. Throw this Big Cat that hits enemies, deal damage, and applies the mark. So you can use all your combos and resets. Pretty cool. You can also double jump and climb up walls. Pretty useful. Next up, we have Black Widow, and let's be honest, the only reason why we're playing Black Widow is for one thing and one thing only. Now, Black Widow has 2 different weapons. Her first weapon is 2 big black batons that are useful for a lot of different things, but their primary function is to slap people with it. Then her secondary is a sniper rifle, and unlike Widowmaker from Overwatch, you don't have to charge up your sniper at all. Simply point and click on the enemy and you'll deal quite a lot of damage. Black Widow has a stamina bar where you can sprint and jump all you want until the stamina bar runs out. Then she can high kick enemies, and if the high kick lands, you can use the same button that you used to kick with to grapple to the enemy, and it kinda knocks them up and stunning them for half a second. Her ultimate ability is that she charges up a big boy bomb. Charge it up, shoot it at a group of enemies, and you deal a lot of AoE explosive damage. Pretty useful. Then we got the man, the myth, the legend, Captain America. All you have to do is run up, punch an enemy twice, and you have the ability to throw your shield 4 times. The shield also ricochets to nearby enemies, so it's pretty useful. By holding your alternate fire, you can hold your shield up and it will deflect incoming projectiles back to the enemy. It also works for ultimates, which is pretty cool. Captain America has unlimited sprint for whatever reason and can jump pretty damn high. While in the air, you'll see this little AoE thing on the ground, slamming down onto the ground, damaging and knocking enemies up. You can also throw your shield at the ground and it'll still bounce to any nearby enemies. He can also dash horizontally, which is pretty useful for engaging and disengaging from fights. Upon ultimate activation, Captain America gets a ton of HP, and for himself and his nearby teammates, they gain extra health regen, additional bonus health, and more movement speed. So it's super useful if you're trying to get into a fight. Next up, we have Cloak and Dagger. With the press of a button, you can swap between Cloak and Dagger quite easily. As Cloak, if you're unaware who Cloak is, she is the female. Cloak's primary fire leads towards the nearest targets and heals surrounding friendlies. Her secondary creates a healing AoE, and she can also send out a small square forwards, healing friendlies that it passes through. Pretty useful. Then when you're playing as Dagger, his primary fire deals a ton of damage to the enemy closest to the crosshair, or closest to him, whatever you want to call it. One of Dagger's abilities is that he can go invisible and fly, while also making any nearby teammates invisible and untargetable, as well as giving them a movement speed. Just like Cloak, Dagger also sends out a large projectile, but this time instead of healing teammates, if it hits enemies, it blinds them and it makes them take extra damage. Following that, Cloak and Dagger's ultimate allows them to dash up to 3 times. While dashing, they leave a trail that damages enemies, as well as healing allies. So Cloak and Dagger is essentially the jack of all trades for supports. Doctor Strange fires a burst of slow moving projectiles, which builds up his passive ability, Dark Energy. On max charge, you can release the Dark Energy, dealing a ton of damage. That damage number is dependent on how much charge you have. What's interesting is that if Doctor Strange reaches 100 dark power or dark energy, he cannot be healed. So you should probably pay attention to how much damage you're doing. Doctor Strange can also fly around like a bird. That's it, he can also fly, I don't know. He also holds up a big shield that has 775 HP. He can also create a portal from 2 places, so you can help teammates or yourself get back to a fight quite quickly. You can also use it to throw enemies off the map at the start, which is pretty fun. You can also see through the portal, shoot through the portal, and much more. Doctor Strange's ultimate ability is a giant AoE stun that makes their souls leave their body. Shooting the souls also deals damage to the player, and any AoE abilities will deal more damage here. Pretty useful. Groot, or the Tree Man, whatever you want to call it, he can punch pretty far. His wingspan is so far that allows him to punch people from across the map. Not really, but you get the idea. He also throws a cluster bomb, where there's one large explosion followed by little explosions after. If he can perform 3 consecutive melee attacks, his 3rd attack will knock up the enemy. Groot can also make small walls and big walls. I mean, that's really all to it, it's a wall. But if Groot punches enemies that are close to the wall, they take additional damage. So the best course of action is try to wall enemies off from one another to try to single them out. They can also heal Groot or any nearby allies for bonus HP. Pretty cool. Groot's ultimate ability shoots out a giant ball, sucks any nearby enemies into the center, it then snares them. If you don't know what snaring means, it's essentially trapping them, not allowing them to move for a little duration. So super useful to combo with different abilities. HawkEye, HawkEye, whatever you want to call him, HawkEye can shoot a charged arrow. But for whatever reason, if you feel like your arrow isn't charging, the simple thing that a lot of people don't understand is that you have to be staring at the enemy. And I mean, charging up your arrow while having your crosshair on the enemy allows you to charge up the shot. His secondary fire, if you press 2, shoots out 3 explosive shots that scatter, but most of the time you just want to be using your charge shot as it does more damage. By pressing shift or whatever that button is, you can slash enemies with the katana, knocking them back. Something that's also unique is that his default melee, which is V if a lot of keyboard players haven't changed it, is you can also, if timed correctly, block incoming projectiles. Extremely useful for survival. You can also double tap space to double jump, which is also very useful. HawkEye's E ability, or whatever it is for controller, fires a large hypersonic arrow which deals damage and slows enemies that are hit by it. HawkEye's ultimate ability creates a after image of enemies that are moving around. Shooting the after image allows you to deal damage to the actual character as well. Pretty cool, huh? And if you made it this far, do me a favor to hit that like and subscribe button, as I have a ton of fun and awesome Marvel Rivals content planned. Hela, whatever you want to call her, can either with her primary fire shoot high damage but slow projectiles that can essentially 2-tap most DPS and healers, or with her alternate fire charge up a burst of shots that stick to the enemy. After a short duration, those projectiles will end up exploding, dealing damage. With the movement ability, she turns into a crow or whatever type of bird you want to call it, making her invincible while she's in that form and giving her a ton of movement to get out of harm's way. You can also slowly glide down by holding space. Now she also throws out a ball projectile. If enemies are directly hit by it, it stuns them, and also has a little bit of a sucking in effect as well. One of her unique passives is that if you kill an enemy, their body will explode, dealing damage to nearby enemies. So in a theory, you could chain a whole bunch of kills together like a domino effect. Hela's ultimate ability essentially turns her into a AC-130 from Modern Warfare 2. She's given 8,000 HP and teleports into the air. You then throw out large damaging projectiles that explode in an AoE, and it basically 1 to 2 taps any damage or healer players, and it only takes a couple more for a tank. Next up we have Hulk, and what's interesting about Hulk is that he has 3 different forms essentially. Baby Hulk, similar to that of Baby Diva. You shoot your little blaster and throw a grenade to build energy or rage, whatever you want to call it, to turn back into Hulk. Hulk can punch enemies. He can also clap his hands together, sending a piercing charge projectile forward, dealing quite a lot of damage. He can also fire a projectile that temporarily stuns an enemy. You can hold your jump button that allows you to charge up a leap. You can grab onto the wall by holding a jump key. He also creates a shield for himself and any allies that are in that area. All of this charges for his final form, or his ultimate ability, Monster Hulk. In his Monster Hulk form, he's essentially the same as the regular Hulk, but he also does more damage and has more HP. But if you charge up your ultimate ability again, you grab a nearby enemy and kind of just toss them around. If Hulk dies or takes too much damage, he turns into his baby form again. Essentially, you're just repeating the process non-stop, again similar to Diva from Overwatch, but instead of starting as the mech, you start as the baby. Iron Fist is a very unique and kind of hard character to play. Iron Fist channels the power of Kung Fu. Punching enemies will make you close the gap and dash into them so you can keep hitting them. As you keep hitting them consecutively, the 5th punch will knock them back. Your alternate fire blocks incoming damage for a short duration, after which you deal a ton of damage. Iron Fist can jump in the air 3 times per jump, so essentially jump 3 times after that, land, and repeat it. You can also wall run, and if there's a corner of the wall, you can kind of wedge yourself in there so you can jump onto unsuspecting players. Iron Fist's movement ability is a dash, that if you dash into an enemy, it will kick them and knock them back. And if you're on low HP and not finding any healers or health packs, you can go into a meta stance that can fully heal you and give you an extra bonus. His ultimate ability allows him to use his abilities for a lot longer and puts his block on a pretty fast cooldown. Iron Man is always flying, he just never stops. Now he can deal a ton of damage with his primary projectile fire, or his alternate fire where he shoots a large laser. Every 3rd shot of the projectile fires 2 additional projectiles at once. His movement ability allows him to launch his thrusters, making him a whole lot more agile in the air. While using his thrusters, he can also launch missiles. He can also power up his suit, making all of his damaging abilities do a lot more damage. Iron Man's ultimate ability charges up a giant bomb, and it deals a whopping 1,000 damage. So if you get hit by it, you kind of just have to accept your fate. Next up up we have Jeff, probably one of the cutest player models I've ever seen in the game. By using your left click, you can hose your teammates down, healing them for a lot of HP, or use your alternative fire, biting fish, or whatever the concoction is at enemies to deal damage. For Jeff's movement, it's kind of like a burrow or a dive. You dive into the ground where only the shark fin is shown. Now, he's not given reduced damage in this form, but he's just a lot harder to hit. Jeff can also shoot out 6 bubbles. These bubbles, if walked into, can heal yourself or allies. Jeff's ultimate ability turns him from a small fish into a rather large fish. Any enemies caught within the AoE will be ingested, as well as allies are also ingested, so be careful. While enemies are taking damage inside your mouth, your allies are getting healed up. Most of the time, you want to take the enemies to the edge of the map and shoot them off the map, but of course that doesn't always go to plan. Next up, we have the comedian, the main man, Loki. Loki's primary fire is that he shoots a projectile and on impact, explodes and deals damage. You can also use your primary fire to shoot at your teammates that heals them. He can go invisible, leaving a clone behind him. Now, besides that one clone, he can also spawn an additional 2 clones. All spawn clones will mimic his shots that he does, and you can freely teleport between the clones. If you swap to one clone, the person you swapped from will turn into a clone as well. Now, he can also spawn a rune on the ground that heals all nearby allies and converts all incoming damage into healing, which is pretty insane. Now, as Loki is into trickery, his ultimate ability allows him to become any hero that's currently in his crosshairs, gaining access to all abilities and a fully charged ultimate. Think of it like Echo from Overwatch if you want that comparison or not. Luna Slow fires a triple burst of hit scan that deals damage to enemies and heals allies if hit by it. She also fires a large ice clump that freezes any enemy hit until it expires, or if one of your teammates are not paying attention and shoots them. Now, upon using one of her abilities, she changes her primary fire to one where she slaps her hands together. These shots go through teammates and enemies, so it can both heal and damage at the same time essentially. And it also looks like you're playing Dance Dance Revolution. She can also place a mark on teammates, and pretty self-explanatory that teammates that have the mark get more healing. Now, when Luna is out of combat, Luna will then turn into Frozo and will start ice skating around, having her movement speed increased. Now, Luna Stone's ultimate is just a giant game of Dance Dance Revolution. She starts playing music where she provides an insanely strong amount of healing to any teammates that are in the AoE. Now, you can also press Q or the same button you casted your ultimate with to swap between healing and movement speed. Magik, however you want to call her, she has a very big sword. And no, it's not the one in her hands. With this sword in her primary attack, she has a pretty big AoE of a melee hit. With her alternative fire, you can charge up a projectile slash, dealing damage to enemies that are at range. What's unique about Magik is her passive. Any outgoing damage is always converted into bonus health magic or shield, whatever you want to call it. Magik's movement ability is a TP or a dash, where she can briefly phase out of reality to easily dodge bullets, and upon coming out of this movement, she can either perform a spinning AoE attack or place a little demon that attacks people for her. She also has 3 dashes that allow her to dash pretty much anywhere she wants to go. If she dashes to an enemy, she will hit the enemy and uppercut them, sending them both up into the air. Magik's ultimate ability turns her into a dark child. She deals more damage than any enemy hit with her slash gets a dot damage. Magneto's primary fire fires a projectile that explodes on impact after hitting enemies or hitting anything else. Now, you could also fire a larger projectile with your alternative fire that charges up below your crosshair. The more stacks you have, the more damage that projectile is going to do. Magneto can also pull out a shield that blocks all incoming damage for a short duration. Something to note is that he can absorb a lot of ultimates that are projectiles with that shield. Magneto can also apply a shield to himself or allies if he so desires. Magneto's ultimate ability is basically a spirit bomb on crack. Instead of channeling all the Earth's powers, you eat all incoming enemy projectiles and damage, and they all get absorbed into that ball. After a short duration and collection time, you throw out that ball, dealing a ton of AoE damage, and it's very nice. Now, when it comes to Mantis, what's unique about her is that her whole kit relies on these health orbs, or these leaf icons you can see on your HUD. Her secondary fire is a targeted heal. Mantis also has the ability to sleep enemies, where she summons a spore, and on the first enemy that hits the spore falls asleep. Pretty self-explanatory. Mantis can also use one of these life orbs, or leaves, whatever you want to call it, to give herself or a teammate extra damage, which can be quite useful, but don't mix up the buttons like me and accidentally give damage rather than health. Mantis will also passively heal herself when she uses a life orb, so when you're playing Mantis, it's in your best interest to keep track of these life orbs. Mantis's ultimate ability is similar to that of Luna Snow. Instead of swapping between heal and speed boost, gives healing and a speed boost at the same time. Moon Knight is pretty much Witch, all brain, no aim. Moon Knight throws a small moon-shaped projectile that bounces between enemies. Moon Knight's alternative fire is that he can throw a larger moon-shaped projectile that deals more damage but takes longer to recharge, and it also bounces. When using your default melee on the third consecutive hit, that third consecutive hit will knock the enemy backwards. Now Moon Knight can also place an Ank, what it's called in Marvel Rivals, or a little ward thing, whatever you really want to call it. If it's placed on an enemy or if an enemy's in that AoE, it will knock enemies into the air and slowly pull them towards the center. You can use this comboed with your primary fire to bounce your projectiles from the Ank to enemy players. This can be extremely useful for dealing a ton of damage in a closed space. Moon Knight has a ton of movement. He has a double jump, he can also glide by holding left shift or whatever button you have it bound to, and he also has a grapple bound to the default button of F. Now a quick and easy way to move around the map, simply by grappling up somewhere, then double jumping after you grapple, then gliding around. Moon Knight's ultimate ability that will rain down hands, dealing a lot of damage. Namork's primary fire is that he throws a spear, pretty self-explanatory. His alternate fire is that he throws a charged up and rather large spear, dealing more damage. For his E ability, he throws down little octopuses or squids, whatever they are. I don't really know the terminology for them, but they act as mini turrets that shoot enemies, and you can place up to 2 of them at one time. Namork's shift ability or his movement ability puts him into a water bubble that suspends him in the air, and while you're in this, you're invincible. Namork's ultimate ability is the big fish, but essentially you're just sending a giant whale into an AoE that does a ton of damage, and if they somehow survive the whale, then players that are hit by it are stunned for a short duration. So a pretty easy cleanup if they're not already dead. Penny Parker's primary fire is a slow moving projectile that she never has to reload. Her alternative fire is that she sends out a web. Enemies hit by this directly are stunned and webbed up for a little bit, or you can throw it on the ground or anywhere, putting a spider web on the ground. Enemies that walk over it are, well, slowed. She can also use them to grapple to, which can be quite useful for getting away in sticky situations. She can place mines that act more like a bouncy Betty than a normal mine. After a quick arm time, if any enemy walks near them, they will spring up and explode, dealing damage to any nearby enemies. Now she can also place like a little turret looking pod down that puts a rather large AoE of a spider web. Now this turret that you place sends out little bionic spiders that goes to the nearest enemy, causing them damage. You can extend this large AoE by placing more of your own web onto the ground. You can also run up walls by holding space when running against them, which can be quite useful in a lot of different scenarios. Penny's ultimate ability turns her into Sonic. She runs super fast around the map, leaving that spider web trail behind her. She can then provide a spider sweep with her primary attack, which knocks enemies up and deals a ton of damage. You can also send out mines with her alternative fire. Psylock, in my eyes, is more like the Genji of Marvel Rivals. Even though people say Spider-Man is, I feel like she fits the cake better. Now her primary fire shoots a burst of 2 shots. With each hit connecting, it lowers the cooldown of her other abilities. Her alternative fire fires a burst of shurikens that after 3 seconds or by hitting the button again, they will come back to you kind of like a boomerang effect, dealing damage between the first point of impact and back to yourself. She can dash in any direction that she points to, dealing damage to enemies. Again, kind of like a Genji dash in a way. She also has the ability to go invisible. While invisible, she also gets a movement speed. Now I believe she's pretty much fully invisible and really hard to see, but sometimes you might land a shot and she'll get revealed for a second. Psylocke's ultimate ability opens a giant AoE, where she dashes at random to and from different enemies, dealing a ton of damage. So again, super useful if enemies are clumped together. Rocket Raccoon has 2 different fire modes. The first one being pretty obvious, that's a machine gun. And this secondary shoots a healing ball that bounces off of everything and anything. Rocket can then dash to any direction you see fit. He also carries 2 charges of that dash. Rocket's passive allows him to run up and run alongside walls by pressing and holding space on a wall. He can also spawn a turret looking thing that respawns any teammate that dies within like the next second. Now it also spits out armor packs that you can go around picking up, kind of like old school Torbjorn. His ultimate places a stationary object that for himself or any teammates that are within range or line of sight, give them a significant damage boost. Scarlet Witch sucks, not in a bad way, but a good way. Take it how you want. Her primary fire shoots a continuous beam towards the closest target, sucking them of their HP. Her alternative fire shoots a projectile that explodes on impact, and she has 4 charges of the secondary fire at a time, so you want to keep in mind of how much charge you have so you can try to get the maximum amount of damage output. Scarlet Witch's movement ability turns her into a ghost, allowing her to fly around. In this quote-unquote ghost form, she's untargetable and unkillable. You can still be seen, but a lot of people don't pay attention to you for whatever reason. Scarlet Witch also throws out a projectile ball that explodes on impact after a little while, or you can detonate it early with the same button press. Enemies in this area are continuously stunned. Scarlet Witch's ultimate ability is pretty powerful. There's a pretty loud voice cue that she yells, then while charging up the ultimate, you free float up. And any enemies in the area or line of sight window, when the ultimate pops, get instantly instantly deleted. It's pretty insane how powerful this ultimate is. Well, once you put more time into the game, it's pretty easy to tell when and where to run to. Spider-Man's primary attack has him hit the nearby enemies with his fists. On consecutively using your primary attack, the third attack is a kick that deals slightly more damage. If the enemy has the passive mark, you can easily see it by having a spiderweb above their head. They will take additional damage. His alternative fire, he shoots out his webs, and they deal damage at a range. And enemies hit by this ranged attack will get the passive mark. Now, Spider-Man with one of his abilities can pull enemies towards him, but if the enemy combatant that you're trying to pull has the mark, upon that ability activation, you will pull yourself towards them instead, and then you will knock them upwards. Now, Spider-Man can also perform an uppercut that knocks yourself and the enemy up into the air. And if the enemy already has the mark, then they're going to be taking more damage. And Spider-Man's whole kit is revolved around his movement with his spider web, allowing himself to get around the map quite quickly. Spider-Man's ultimate ability gives him an extra HP or bonus health, shield, whatever you want to call it, and does a ton of damage in an AoE for a short duration. A lot of people say that his ultimate is overpowered, but let me know down below in the comments what you think about it. Squirrel Girl, besides being kind of bad, Squirrel Girl's primary fire, Slingshot, fires an acorn that explodes on impact. It explodes on impact with enemies or after one bounce against the wall or anything like that. Her secondary fire throws a massive acorn that rolls around and stops at the first enemy it hits. You can also charge up the acorn. The more charge, the more speed it's going to be going at. Squirrel Girl's movement ability uses her tail, allowing her to dash upwards whether she's on the ground or midair. She can also eat a big acorn, or a big nut, however you want to call it, to which instantly reloads her primary fire and gives her some extra damage. Squirrel Girl's ultimate ability sends a horde of squirrels running forward, but I like to call it the nut race. These squirrels run quite fast and they deal damage to anyone they hit. If the squirrels hit any obstacle, whether that be a wall, a trash can, a bench, anything like that, they will bounce off of it. And I'm going to be rather honest, that ability is quite easy to dodge. Starlord in a way kinda acts like Tracer from Overwatch if you want some type of reference. Starlord's primary fire fires very high damage but short range rapid fire bursts of his pistols or whatever these are called. Hitting your alternative fire will make him dodge in the direction you're running to. So for example, if you're holding D then hit your dodge button, you'll be dashing and dodging to the right. One of Starlord's many movement abilities gives him a dash where you can keep up to 2 dashes stored. Starlord can also pop flight for a little short duration, which allows him to fly in any way he wants. His little dodge or shift ability does damage in any direction, making him a bit invulnerable for a while. Now, Starlord's ultimate ability is kind of like Soldier's ultimate from Overwatch, but instead of running around with the aimbot, you're now flying in the air and given the aimbot as well. Mommy Storm is another flying hero, similar to that of Iron Man. Her primary fire is wind blades that pierces enemies. Her alternative fire launches a lightning strike, which deals damage to enemies that are in front of her. Storm is always surrounded by a large storm that provides a movement boost to herself and her teammates if she's in the wind form, and a damage boost if she's in her lightning form. And she can also power up her storms with the press of a button. In wind form, her teammates speed up even more while slowing enemies. And if in the lightning form and she powers up, well, she does more damage. And she will also passively hit enemies with thunder or lightning to enemies that are caught in that area of effect. Storm's ultimate is essentially turning yourself into an EF4 tornado. Upon ultimate activation, you move around and choose where you want to summon the tornado. After confirming it, you deal an insane amount of AoE damage. Now you can kind of choose the direction of where the storm's going, but it is rather slow. Next up we have Punisher, and probably one of the easiest characters to pick up in this game. So if you're picking up Marvel Rivals for the first time, I recommend trying out Punisher first. So for Punisher, his primary fire is a hit scan assault rifle. Pretty standard to most games that have a hit scan type character like this. Now by pressing 2 on the keyboard or swapping whatever other button you have, you can swap to a shotgun that's close range but yet super effective. Punisher can then fire a smoke grenade that blocks any vision or line of sight between him and the enemies, and by using it, it also kind of knocks you back so you can use it as an escape if need be. Now his passive ability highlights players that are behind cover after a few seconds. Now you can also fire a grapple hook that only works for himself, but you can use it to get across the map quite quickly. You can also create a giant turret that fires explosive bullets that deal a ton of damage, but they are fired as projectiles rather than hit scan because that would be overpowered. Now Punisher's ultimate ability essentially brings out the whole ocean and a homing launcher on top, firing the Gatling guns at your cursor and the rocket shooting at any nearby enemies. Thor likes to smack. He loves smacking everyone with Mjolnir. Now what's unique about Thor is that he doesn't really have any cooldowns. Instead, all of his abilities are based on charges. As you can see, there's 3 little hammer charges below the crosshair, to which each ability corresponds with how many hammer charges you need to use. Thor has a lot of different abilities. You can place like a force AoE shield type thing that charges up his stacks quite quickly. You can also change his stance where instead of throwing a hammer hammer, you start throwing lightning for a few seconds, dealing more damage. You can also throw out the hammer, and then after a few seconds it will return back to you, dealing damage between the initial impact and yourself, similar to that of Psylock. Now Thor's movement ability is a dash. The longer you hold up the dash, the further you're gonna go. Pretty straightforward. Thor's ultimate ability launches him up into the air for a few seconds. There you can see there's a large AoE to where any enemies that you land on will be given a ton of damage. Venom's primary fire shoots tentacles or whatever this is towards the center of your crosshair. You can also use the same tentacles to wrap around your enemies within range and slowing them down. If the enemies stay within that dedicated range long enough, they take additional damage. Now, just like Spider-Man, Venom has a ton of movement where you can wall run alongside the wall. You can use the Venom webs to go around the map quite quickly. But while you're midair and detached from the web, you can easily slam down into the ground, dealing damage to enemies and knocking enemies up into the air that are hit by it. So a very strong initiator type tank. Now Venom can convert all of the damage he's taken into additional bonus health with the press of a button, making Venom quite tanky. Venom's ultimate puts him into the ground, making him untargetable and moving around. Once he reaches his desired location or the players you want to consume, you can quite easily devour the player right above you. All of the damage that Venom does to enemies with his ultimate ability is converted back into his HP, making him one of the tankiest tanks there is in Marvel Rivals. Winter Soldier's primary fire is a Magnum, which only holds 3 shots. However, it deals a ton of damage. The bullets on impact also explode, dealing additional damage. Every single time Winter Soldier uses an ability, it instantly reloads his weapon and gives him additional bonus health or shield, wherever you want to call it. On his alternative fire, he can charge up a hook that can hook people into you, kind of like a Roadhog in a way. He can also dash in any direction, and if he hits an enemy in the dash direction, he will carry them with him, dealing damage and then doing an uppercut at the end. He also has an ability that pierces through enemies that deals damage, so pretty useful for enemies that are in a tight corridor or some type of choke. Now Winter Soldier's ultimate is you go up into the air and slam down into enemies. Now what's interesting about his ultimate ability is that it's an execution reset, similar to that of Pike from League of Legends if you're familiar with that. But it's basically if enemies are under 20% HP and you hit them with the ultimate, they will instantly die. If you kill an enemy with your ultimate, it instantly resets the charge. So essentially, you can keep resetting your ultimate off of kills. Wolverine, similar to that of Black Panther in a way, his primary attack is slashing his claws on enemies. He can also dash forward, as well as double slashing any enemies in range. Now the damage that Wolverine deals equals to a percentage of the enemy's max health, which is unique because I believe he's the only character in Marvel Rivals that has this. And that increasing amount of damage he deals increases with the amount of rage that he builds up. So in a sense, another similarity to that of Tryndamere from League of Legends. The more you attack, the more damage you're going to end up doing. Now he can also perform a leap or a dash that he snatches any enemy that is close to him and carries them with him. Once landing, he slams down the enemy and deals damage. After landing, his claws slash a lot faster without any delay, so you can rapidly get a ton of damage out. Now one of his abilities is a shout. You can kind of think of it like a taunt in a way, where for a few seconds he'll take reduced damage. Now Wolverine's ultimate ability is that he knocks any enemies that are in front of him up into the air, then he can choose where he wants to slam them down into, dealing a ton of damage. Now that was a ton of characters to go through. I have timestamps so you can easily navigate everything. Now I already have 2 advanced guides for Black Widow and Hawkeye already out, and if you would like to see more of this content, please let me know down in the comments below, and do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. I hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.